There you go.
We are in public session. Deputy Paula McLaughlin is in substitution for Deputy Carty, and Deputy Thomas Pringle is in substitution for Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice. The meeting, before we begin, can remind members and witnesses and persons in the public gallery to turn off their mobile phones. Members are requested to ensure that for during the meeting the mobile phones are turned off. The purpose of today's meeting is to hear from the Minister on the Sustainability Impact Assessment. The community will hear from Mr Charlie McConalogue, TD, Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine, and his officials. All those present in the committee room are asked to exercise personal responsibility to protect yourselves and others from the risk of contacting COVID-19. And 2 members of our Secretariat are out this evening with COVID, so it's most definitely not gone away. So wishing Christy and Rebecca the best, and hopefully they'll be back to work soon. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege in respect to the evidence they give to a committee. This means that witnesses have full defence and information action planning said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that that is reasonable, no adverse commentary should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. Witnesses who are to give evidence on occasion outside the parliamentary precincts are asked to note that they may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as witness giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts and may consider it appropriate to take legal advice in this matter. Privilege against defamation does not apply to publication by you outside the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from the proceedings. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official either our name or such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Parliamentary privilege is considered to apply to persons or members participating online in the committee meeting for their participation from within the parliamentary precincts. There can be no assurance in relation to participation online from outside the parliamentary precincts, and members should be mindful of this when they are contributing. The Sustainability Impact Assessment. The committee will hear from Mr Charlie McConalogue, Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine, Dr Cecil Beamish, Assistant Secretary, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, Ms Josephine Kelly, Principal Officer, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, Mr Dominic Rehan, Director of Economic and Strategy Services, Board East Vala, and Mr Kieran Kelly, Director of Fisheries Ecosystems Advisory Service, Marine Institute. I now ask the Minister to make his opening statement.
Thanks very much, Chairperson and members, and I welcome the opportunity to present this Sustainability Impact Assessment to the committee today. As in previous years, a rigorous assessment has been undertaken to examine the implications for Ireland of the potential fishing opportunities for the year ahead. These last few years, as we know, have been particularly challenging for our fishing industry. In addition to the continuing fuel crisis, the impact of the UK's withdrawal from the EU and the quota transfers under the TCA are still having an effect. I can assure the committee chairperson that I, as Minister, and the Government continue to keep the focus on the disproportionate quota reductions for Ireland under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and to use any and every opportunity available to seek constructive solutions that would help to alleviate this unacceptable position. I'm keeping a strong focus on the matter within the Fisheries Council and making it clear that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement transfers must be addressed within the EU. The UK's withdrawal from the EU has also led to significant changes to the processes involved in setting total allowable catches for the majority of our commercial fish stocks. Approximately 40 of Ireland's fish stocks, which were previously exclusively European Union resources, are now shared resources, most shared with the UK. The Commission has the sole competence to negotiate with third countries on behalf of the EU and for the setting of fishing opportunities for shared stocks, and unfortunately the UK now counts as a third country. The bilateral negotiations between the Commission on behalf of the EU and the UK are due to begin in November, and I will go into more detail on these consultations in a moment. Based on the past experience of the last year post-Brexit, and the changes that this has led to in the procedures for setting fishing opportunities for the EU, I decided that this Sustainability Impact Assessment process should commence at the start of October rather than later, to be as relevant as possible. The Sustainable Impact Assessment is an essential step in Ireland's preparation for the total allowable catch setting process, and I want to have the process completed before we commence the EU-UK consultations. The benefits of carrying out the process at this stage allows for input from stakeholders, analysis by Bord Iascaigh and also by the Marine Institute, and views of the Oireachtas in time for the start of the total allowable catch setting process. And as you outlined, Cathaoirleach, I'm joined by two representatives, Kieran Kelly from the Marine Institute, who's our scientific expert here, and also Dominic Rehan, who socio and economic impact expert from Bord Iascaigh, as well as you outlined, Cecil Beamish and Josephine Kelly from my own team. I decided again to use the ICES scientific advice as the basis for this year's scientific impact assessment. The ICES advice forms the basis of the scientific advice used by the Commission. Therefore, ICES, which, as most of you know, is the International Council for Exploration of the Seas, who gather all the scientific advice. Their advice for the relevant stocks provides suitable guidance for the total allowable catch figures, which would normally be proposed by the Commission. This allowed for a meaningful public consultation and also for realistic engagement with their stakeholders, and it allowed the Marine Institute and Bord Iascaigh to produce the biological and socio-economic impact assessments to inform us. The waters surrounding Ireland contain some of the most productive fishing grounds in the EU, and we have a duty of care and a national self-interest to protect their biological richness, and as such they must be managed responsibly and sustainably. The landing obligation, which aims to eliminate the wasteful and unsustainable practice of discarding fish, has been fully implemented since 2019. The practical application of the landing obligation has been challenging for operators, requiring changes in fishing practices and in behaviour. However, my department, along with BIM, continue to work together with fishers in order to adapt and develop the most selective and sustainable fishing methods. The efforts and commitment of our fishers in this matter have been and remain very important. Another key feature of the Common Fisheries Policy is the setting of total allowable catches and quotas to deliver maximum sustainable yields. That fact, fishing at maximum sustainable yield, or FMSY as is known for short, is the largest average catch yield or yield that can continuously be taken from a stock under existing environmental conditions. Progress is being achieved in terms of the sustainability of fish stocks, and of course in the past a failure to fish at FMSY and a failure also to have the scientific assessment which we so rely on led to overfishing in some instances of stocks and a depletion of stocks. So it's really important for sustainable stocks every year going forward that we don't take any more from that stock that undermines its health and the size of the stock, so that the fish will be there next year and the year after. Progress is being achieved in terms of the sustainability of fish stocks, and for 2022, 38 stocks of interest to Ireland are fished at below maximum sustainable yield. In 2013, only 20 stocks were fished at this sustainable level, so it's now up to 38 from 20 back in 2013. And the number of stocks overfished is 15 in 2022, and that's down from 22 in previous years. This is a significant achievement, and Ireland will continue to work with stakeholders and the Commission and other Member States as well as third countries to build on this tangible progress to achieve our objectives of healthy fish stocks and sustainable fishing. I would also like Cathaoirleach to take this opportunity to update the committee on the upcoming report by the European Commission on the functioning of the Common Fisheries Policy. Under the Common Fisheries Policy regulation, the European Commission is required to report to the European Parliament and to the EU Council on the functioning of the CFP by the end of this year. The Commission has indicated that its report on the functioning of the Common Fisheries Policy will take the form of a communication, analysing the dimensions of the CFP and looking at the interaction between fisheries management and the objectives of the European Green Deal. In addition, the communication will also address the social dimension of the Common Fisheries Policy and consider how to improve the delivery of CFP policy objectives. I have consistently made clear the Irish Government's assessment that the substantial changes brought about in fisheries policy as a result of the Trade and Cooperation Brexit Agreement requires that internally, within the EU, a comprehensive review must be carried out of the Common Fisheries Policy that would support changes to deliver a fair and equitable policy. Earlier this year, I established the National Common Fisheries Policy Review Group, bringing together relevant stakeholders to examine the issues that arise for Ireland in the context of the CFP review and to advise me on priorities for the negotiations and to identify as well, importantly, strategies most likely to influence the outcome of the review. That review was chaired by Mr John Malone, who is a former Secretary-General of the Department of Agriculture, and he was assisted by a steering committee comprising of Micheál Kennedy, former Director of the Marine Institute and the EPA, and also Mr Donald Maguire, former Director in BIM. And I want to thank them, the three of them, and also all stakeholders for their work in it. And the group involved representatives of all key stakeholders, including, very importantly, industry representative groups, fisher representatives, and also environmental NGOs. That review group submitted its final report to me on the 5th of August, and the stakeholders have set out a number of recommendations on aspects of the common fisheries policy which need to be addressed in order to adapt to the monumental changes of recent years and ensure a sustainable future for the sector. I have forwarded a copy of that report to the Fisheries Commissioner, Virginia Sinavicius, who is responsible for the Common Fishery Policy Review. I've made clear that I am fully satisfied that our stakeholders' report demonstrates that there is a need for legislative changes in the current policy to address the disproportionate impacts of the TCA and in the context of the new environmental challenges we're facing as well. I've asked him to review the report's findings and recommendations and consider how these can be taken forward in support of a fair and balanced CFP. To touch, Cathaoirleach, on the EU-UK consultations, which are the important key step now in terms of stepping forward the quota negotiations for next year. The bilateral consultations with the UK for 2023 for shared stocks are due to begin now at the start of November. The sustainability impact assessment process and your input here today will help to further develop Ireland's position during and for those upcoming negotiations, and those negotiations will be led by the European Commission on behalf of all Member States, and I and my team will be fully engaged at EU level to ensure that Ireland's interests are recognised and pursued with Commissioner Sinavicius and his team. We're hopeful that agreement can be reached in time to allow the outcome to be discussed at the Fisheries Council on the 12th and 13th of December and to feed into the TAC and quota regulations for 2023. I will be insisting, Cathaoirleach, that the Hague preferences are applied at the December Council for the relevant fish stocks. However, if an EU-UK agreement is not secured, there is a contingency plan in place to ensure that fishing can continue at the start of 2023 without interruption. Under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, in the event that agreement with the UK can't be reached by the 20th of December, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement provides for each party to set provisional tax applying from the 1st of January at the scientific level advised by ICES. In previous years, the Commission developed a plan for provisional tax for the first 3 months of the year. This saw tax for most stocks set at 25% of the previous year's TAC level, with the full TAC applied for coastal state stocks such as mackerel and blue whiting, which are seasonal and very much at the start of the year. While this situation isn't ideal, if needed, it provides certainty and continuity for fishing industry in the new year. Management arrangements for 3 migratory species in the north-east Atlantic in which we have an interest, those being blue whiting, Atlanto-Scandian herring and mackerel. They are negotiated by means of a coastal states framework between the parties whose waters significant concentrations of these stocks are to be found in and who have normally had a track record in fishing them. The coastal states negotiations for 2023 commenced last week in London. An agreement was reached on setting the total allowable catches for herring at 511,000 tonnes, and the EU and Ireland have a relatively small share of, that's Atlanto-Scandian herring, a relatively small share of this stock. It's also likely that the coastal states will agree on setting the TAC for mackerel at 782,000 tonnes, in line with the ICES advice, although this hasn't been finalised yet. The ICES advice is based on the maximum sustainable yield approach and represents a reduction of 2% compared to last year's total allowable catch. The TAC for blue whiting hasn't been agreed yet. The ICES advice calls for an 81% increase, but the coastal states are continuing discussions as there is divergence of opinion as to whether all of the increase should be applied. The 2014 sharing arrangement for mackerel between the EU, Norway and the Faroe Islands expired at the end of 2020. and discussions aimed at reaching a new agreement on a new sharing arrangement for mackerel began earlier this year, and they are still ongoing. I've been clear on the need to agree on a sharing agreement for mackerel that respects the EU and, in turn, Ireland's proper share of the global TAC. We continue to oppose the setting of an unacceptably high unilateral quotas for mackerel by a number of third countries. I've articulated our concerns about what has happened over the past 2 years, in particular at EU Fisheries Council and directly to Commissioner Sinevicius. And if this unacceptable behaviour is continued in 2023 by these countries, the EU must work together and use all available tools so that there are real and effective consequences for such behaviour. The coastal state parties have also committed to begin discussions for new sharing arrangements for Atlanto, Scandi and herring, and also for blue whiting early next year. Moving on to the sustainable impact assessment itself, in order for the SEI to be carried out, the ICES scientific advice for the stocks has been used as the basis for the assessment. As part of the assessment, an open consultation process was initiated whereby stakeholders were asked to submit their comments and observations on the ICES advice for fish stocks for next year and the European Commission's communication towards more sustainable fishing in the EU state of play and orientations for 2023 and its accompanying staff working document. So from the 12th of October, then our online portal at www.fishingnet.ie was activated to enable the transmission of electronic submissions for consideration. 2 submissions to the public consultation were received. The full content of all the submissions received by the deadline will be published on the website. In addition to the written submissions, I convened a meeting of stakeholders, including fishing industry representatives and environmental NGOs last week on the 20th of October. The purpose of this meeting was to give a further opportunity to representatives to outline their positions on the many aspects of the communication and on the scientific advice, and I'd like to thank the stakeholders for the contributions on the impact assessment. They set out a range of positions, however there were also many commonalities, and I agree with many of the sentiments expressed through the consultation process, which all in I consider have the same objective of sustainable fishing and protection of our fishing resource and our marine ecosystem. There is a clear call for adherence to the advice on setting tax in accordance with fishing at maximum sustainable yield. We must also make use of the provisions of the Western Waters multi-annual plan to deal with stocks where scientific advice indicates the stock is in poor shape. In recent years, in order to reduce catches of depleted stocks in mixed fisheries, tax were set as bycatch only at levels that help the biomass of these vulnerable stocks to recover to sustainable levels. These were complemented by remedial technical measures in the Celtic Sea, west of Scotland and in the Irish Sea too. The Marine Institute and BIM made invaluable contributions to the assessment of the ICES advice, which is contained in the Sea Fishery Sustainability Impact Assessment before you today, and I'd like to briefly set out the findings contained in that assessment. From a purely biological perspective, the Marine Institute's view, which coincides with the ICES view, is that there have been an improvement in the status of some fish stocks, which is welcome. However, others remain a concern. In the impact assessment, the Marine Institute summaries the pressure on the 75 stocks, which will be dealt with in the 2022 stock book, and compares this assessment with the same evaluation presented in previous year's stock books. The number of sustainably fished stocks has increased to 38. In terms of percentages, this is an increase to 51%, and the number of stocks overfished is currently 20%. The number of stocks with unknown status has decreased to 22 because of increasing and improving scientific advice and research. It's good to see stocks continue on an upwards trend for next year, and it must be remembered that there were only 20 sustainably fished stocks as recently as 2013, and that's now up to 38. There are multiple reasons why stocks have unknown status, including short time series of biological data, conflicting data inputs, low catches or insufficient sampling data, or indeed missing catch information. Over time, the percentage of stocks with unknown pressure and state indicators has declined, thankfully. The specific details for all stocks are available in this SIA, which will be laid before the Dáil, and further information on the fish stocks of interest to Ireland are available in the stock book, which is prepared annually, and it's a big piece of work by the Marine Institute, and it's available on their website. With regard to the economic and social impact, as I indicated, BIM has based the socio-economic assessment on the ICES advice where available. In cases where the ICES advice was not yet available, or where ICES advice had provided zero catch advice for a stock, a rollover of last year's tax was assumed so that the assessment of these stocks could be carried out by BIM. ICE's advice for net fruits, or prawns as we know them commonly, is expected to be released on the 28th of October, so we don't have that yet. In advance of the advice, and to assist consideration of the stocks in the Celtic and Irish seas, different scenarios of minus 10% reduction, a straightforward rollover, and a plus 10% increase were examined, as this is an important stock for our fishing industry. It's our second most valuable stock in all of our, across our whole sector. Therefore, it's important to highlight that BIM's estimates may change depending on the final quotas and total allowable catches agreed between the EU and the UK. As this advice is for a single stock assessment, we can expect significant changes for stocks in mixed fisheries where a particular stock is depleted. This is the case, for example, for cod stocks around the coast, and the total allowable catches for demersal stocks where cod is a bycatch will be set to support the protection and rebuilding of the depleted stocks. If the tax were to be agreed on the basis of the assumptions I've mentioned, we would see a net increase in fishing opportunity of 2% by volume in tonnes, but a reduction of 6% in value. This amounts to a direct income reduction of minus €13 million. For the demersal whitefish sector, while this would mean a reduction of 12% in volume of fishing activity and a reduction of 6% by value, with a direct income loss of €6.2 million. For the pelagic sector, this would result in a reduction of 5% by volume and 7% by value, with a direct income reduction of €6.9 million. This is primarily due to the decrease in horse mackerel, where ICE has provided zero catch advice for next year. This would, however, be partially offset by following the significant increase in the advice for blue whiting, which is recommended an increase of 81%. In addition to the direct losses to the fleet of quota reductions, income would also be lost from the processing sector as a result of reduced catches and in a number of ancillary industries such as net making, chandlery, engineering and refrigeration. This would obviously have a knock-on effect for employment, and Bord Iascaigh Mhara further estimates on the basis of the most recent employment surveys of the catching sector that if the tax were set in accordance with the single stock advice, it could impact 400 full and part-time jobs. This could occur either through reduced incomes, partial layoffs or redundancies in the seafood sector. With regard to the Hague preferences, Chairperson, that's the additional amounts of quota that Ireland can claim for important whitefish stocks when the tax fall below set levels. They are negotiated annually at the Fisheries Council in December, and they can't be taken for granted. Many member states often strenuously object to the application of the additional quota for Ireland, and obviously ensuring that the preferences are applied will be a key political priority for me at the December meeting. To conclude, the Sea Fisheries Sustainability Impact Assessment, which we're discussing here today, provides a good picture of the state of stocks and possible implications for 2023. I'd like to thank and acknowledge those who contributed to the production of the impact assessment. While the assessment is based on the ICE's advice rather than tax proposed by the Commission, it does highlight the potential for significant impacts on the Irish fishing industry. There are some stocks where ICE has issued zero advice or advice for zero catches. However, with the implementation of the landing obligation and the requirement to land all catches, including bycatches from such stocks, this would lead to choke situations in mixed fisheries. The EU and UK previously established specific tax for bycatches for these stocks to avoid fisheries being choked. They highlight the difficulty of fishing all stocks in a mixed fishery at MSY at the same time, so it is challenging. We need to strike a balance between the potential for severe socio-economic impacts and the need to achieve good environmental status for the stocks. I will be supportive of a similar approach as was taken in previous years for these depleted stocks. And I look forward now, Chairperson, to hearing and answering any questions that members have. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Collins is first to indicate.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Minister, and the other witnesses that are here before us today. I have a few questions, small statement and a few questions, and I'll try and put them all together, Minister, to make it easier for you to answer. Minister, my questions are based on your opening statement, and in fact, very simple questions. In your opening statement, you say these last few years have been particularly challenging for our fishing industry. In addition to the continuing fuel crisis, the impacts of the UK's withdrawal from the EU and the quota transfers under the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement are still having a very negative effect. So, Minister, these are your words, but what have you and your government done to provide our Irish fishermen with a fuel subsidy? Take a look at the French and the Spanish fishermen who have given, and the government have given their fishermen a fuel subsidy. And why have this government stood back and not done so? For our Irish fishermen, after all, Minister, this government has given away the rights of our fishermen to fish in our Irish waters to foreign fleets. You would think you and the extremist Greens government would have at least given a fuel subsidy to our fishermen. And, you know, I suppose as well as a fuel subsidy, you know, and I was at the recent Irish Southwest Fishermen's Organisation's AGM, and it's good to go in and, I suppose, to hear the organisation speak with Pat Murphy at its helm, and no better man, in fairness, to put his case. But the members, Minister, and they're the people on the ground, at the sea, I was going to say on the ground, they're the people that know exactly what's going on. And they asked me, what about, you know, the recent announcement about giving some people back, you know, I suppose energy, a bit of help with their energy bills, whether it is businesses or ordinary individuals. They also, fishermen, also have energy bills, severe energy bills. And is there anything in this previous budget, because I was in just there when I was speaking about the finance bill, and I asked the Minister the same question in relation to fishing. What is the delivery for fishing in the last budget? And I see zilch. But maybe you can tell me that, you know, fishermen, as I say, have severe energy costs, and they're asking me, is there anything out there in relation to their energy costs, the fuel costs, as I said, from the Spanish and the French are getting it. Why didn't the Irish get it? All we get is the decommissioning and the tie-up schemes, and sadly I was totally opposed to them, as was the Irish Southwest. But still, unfortunately, fishermen in Southwest Cork as well in other areas are saying sometimes it's the only way out now of a sad situation. But I would also like to ask you, Minister, again, in reference to your opening statement, you say the waters surrounding Ireland contain some of the most productive fishing grounds in the EU. You also say we have a duty of care and a national self-interest to protect their biological riches, and as such, they must be managed responsibly and sustainably. That's great, Minister, but where in the world does it make sense to give away our fishing rights to foreign fleets? And you can say it's so, we must be responsible, etc. But where does it make any sense that a boat fishing out of Castletonbear or Union Hall or Killybegs and Donegal should be tied up at the pier while their foreign counterparts can fish away to their heart's content, very close maybe in some of our waters? It's no wonder that fishermen, as I said a while ago, are very, very frustrated. I attended that AGM, and there's a sense of massive frustration out there as the only political figure, elected political figure that attended it. But, you know, I think it would be educational for any politician to attend the AGM, because each year they find that the hill is getting harder to climb, Minister. And this is nothing personal to me, to you, and it seems like it always is, but I think you actually got a poison chalice, Minister. But look, it is what it is, and we've been led down this road. But you are the Minister, and the fishermen are angry, and you and this department need to stand up, fight for our fishermen. This is why we elected you. This is why we were elected ourselves, to go out there and get them a fuel subsidy. Get out there and try and improve our quotas. It's an absolute disgrace what has happened to this industry. One of the finest indigenous industries in this country, and this government and the department officials have driven them to the shore with no prospects of a future for many. My questions are maybe my repeat statement over and over again. Will you try and get some of our quota back? And again, as per my question, will you and your government provide a fuel subsidy? And just, if you give, I can indulge just one extra minute, Minister, we welcome the proposed 81%, and I just sincerely hope that that's going to happen. And obviously that decisions have to be made around that increase in blue whiting. But this is only going to benefit a club of 23 vessels in our fleet under the current application of the policy. Will you revise the policy so those other pelagic vessels who lose their scad mackerel fishery will get a fair share of this national fishery? As I mentioned, the scad mackerel stock is estimated to have 805,000 tonnes of live fish. Knowing this species lives to a good age and there are good results from the egg survey 2 years ago, surely we can agree to adopt the rebuilding plan accepted by ICES to be precautionary. And Minister, finally, I am sure you know I am not going to end my contribution without once again asking, why are we not approaching ICAT for a small quota for bluefin tuna? If you want to know why cod and herring stocks are so low, I think the seas full of these fish could be a significant contribution in their eating of this fish, flattening here for to be caught by everyone else. But us, even the Japanese fleet, land into Kellybegs when coming here to catch them. And yes, I know they do also in international waters, but we cannot catch them, and they are only a mile from our shore. As I said, the bluefin tuna. So I'd appreciate you might be able to answer some of those questions, Minister. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy Collins. So, in relation to the fuel subsidy, first of all, so obviously, and you pointed out there that in my opening statement I outlined the challenges that we've had, and they have been real challenges over the last couple of years, and biggest of all being the Brexit challenge and the impact that that's had on quota. Of course, we fought in every way we could to try and protect the sector from any impact. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to protect it fully from any impact, given the fact that, in terms of the full outcome of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, we know, because we discussed it here on many occasions before that as well, the fact that a no-deal scenario would have been really, really damaging for our fishing sector, because 1/3 of the fish that we catch is caught in British waters, and that access to those waters was really important. So it was really difficult. But so that's been a challenge, and one that we've worked hard and worked along with our fishers to deal with. Since the start of the year, obviously, we've had the fuel challenge, like with many other sectors of society, emerging from the illegal invasion of Ukraine. So that led to an immediate spike in fuel for fishing vessels. Marine gas oil is different from a lot of other fuels in that there isn't any revenue tax applied to it, and the VAT is reclaimable. So there isn't the capacity there to reduce the revenue tax on it, because it isn't there. But it spiked from about 60 cents a litre before the invasion till over €1 very quickly afterwards, and it has gone up and down, spiked up and down since that. I met shortly after the legal invasion with the fishers at their request to discuss that challenge. They made the request to me, the fisher representatives, all of them coming together, made the request to me for a second-month tie-up scheme. That's what they requested of me, to try and address and help with the impact that's there on fuel. The Sea Fisheries Task Force, which I set up last year, had recommended that this year there would be a 1-month tie-up available to every boat, and that was in play, and I had that progressing. But they asked for a second month, specifically because of the real challenges the fleet was experiencing from fuel. So I then moved and delivered that and implemented that. That meant an extra €12 million to the whitefish sector through that second month tie-up scheme. And when you look at that, in terms of the financial allocation to our fleet is similar in relation to what the financial allocation would have been to that France has applied to their fleet, for example, or Spain to their fleet. So that's been in place now since June, and it's running up until the end of November. So I have stepped in and delivered that €12 million, Deputy, much needed to support the sector. The sector have been requesting that I would do something as well, similar to what, say, France and Spain have done, on top of that measure. But I've been assessing how the measure that I have put in place has been working. And I say other member states didn't do that. They took a different approach, but a similar level of investment when you to compare to the size of their fleet. So that runs to the end of November. Now, we have seen a spike in the last couple of weeks again. It has gone down a bit in the last week, but it spiked till over €1 in terms of the international benchmark there a week to 2 weeks ago. It's come back down to the mid to high 80s in the last few days. that's the international benchmark price. It would be higher than that in terms of the actual at the pump as such for vessels because of the transport, etc. So I am assessing the situation again in light of that, and looking at the challenges that's there, because I am keen to ensure that we have appropriate supports in place for our fishing sector. Some have indicated that there's a fund available at European level, which I'm simply leaving behind by not applying such a support as an extra or an additional support scheme. But what the European Commission have actually done is that they have provided flexibility for member states to use some of their unspent or future European Maritime Fisheries Fund money to pay out in terms of reduced fuel costs. So it's not that there's a separate fund there. It would mean using funding that you're going to that is allocated and earmarked for the industry and for investment in the industry. It would mean using that instead as a direct upfront payment to deal with the pressures that's there at the moment. So I've never ruled that out. I've said that I've been continuing to monitor the situation and continuing to monitor the impact of the €12 million that I've already put in place. So I am looking afresh at that, because none of us have been able to know where we're going with fuel. I think we all had hoped that it would taper off and reduce, but that hasn't been the case, and prices have somewhat spiked again. So I'm looking and assessing that afresh again, Deputy Collins. You indicated then that this government has given away to foreign governments the right to fish or fish. So listen, that's not something this government has done. There's been, as you know, a common fisheries policy established in the early 1980s, whereby the percentage share that each country has of various fish stocks was set and allocated, and it was set and allocated the percentages based at that time on the amount of catching that different countries were doing at that time. And so certain percentages, some countries got higher percentages of stocks, some countries got lesser percentages of stocks based on how much they were fishing it at that time. That was in the early 80s. That was done as a management tool, because as we know, to manage the waters generally. Because as we know, if you don't manage waters or manage stocks, they get depleted and they get fished out. But it was set in the early 80s, and despite many reviews and many tugs of war since at European level, that overall allocation key as such for various stocks between countries has stayed the same since the early 80s. And in order to change it at European level, you have to get a qualified majority vote at a European Council meeting. The one big impact we've had to that allocation key has been Brexit, because the UK have left, and that has disrupted the allocation key, and it's disrupted in a way that has been unfair to us. So that's something that I'm looking to get addressed, and I'm raising at each and every council meeting and every engagement I have with my colleagues, that it should be addressed. And the point I'm making, as I said in my statement, is that in terms of the Common Fisheries Policy review that is to conclude over the course of the next number of months, that should be addressed, and that we should that unfair burden we have should be addressed as part of that. But it's a system that's been in place since the early 80s, so it's not something this government has done. In fact, everything I've done as Minister Deputy has been to try and improve our fishery situation, has been to try and get more quota for our fleet, and indeed have been battling that and voted against many things at European level in order to assert and follow that objective. Listen, you mentioned in relation to the decommissioning scheme, which you say you oppose and the Irish South and West oppose. The Irish South and West now, along with every other fishing representative organisation, would have been part of the Sea Fisheries Task Force group, which I set up, because post-Brexit and post that massive impact on our fisheries, a really damaging impact on our fisheries from Brexit, I brought all of the fishing voices together to advise me on how I could best support the sector and how we could respond to that challenge. And they unanimously put forward their task force report to me. And one of their asks of me was that I would do a decommissioning scheme to address the size of our fleet and make sure the size of our fleet was that their boats were economic and viable. So that was a request from them, and all of the fisheries organisations were unanimously signed up to that, Deputy Collins. It's not the situation any of us want to be in. I wish I could bring about a situation where we gather in more quota, and as I say, I'm trying to do that all the time. But all of us, both politically and also the fisher representatives, know we have to deal with the situation as it stands at the moment, and also as we try to change it. And one of the recommendations they've made to me is a decommissioning scheme. So that's why I've come forward and followed through in relation to their request to me. Likewise, and you mentioned about boats being tied up while foreign boats fish. So again, that has been a request to me that I would do a tie-up scheme. Again, the task force asked me for that. That's all of the fishing representatives, which I brought together. They asked me for that tie-up scheme. As I said, and was a 1-month tie-up scheme for 2022. And as I say, they subsequently asked for a 2nd-month tie-up scheme to respond to the fuel challenge, which I addressed earlier on. The way a tie-up scheme works is that 1 out of every 3 boat ties up in any given month. That then means it doesn't change the level of quota we have. We still fish our full quota, so it's not that other countries are in fishing the quota, our national quota. Our national quota still gets fully fished, but basically instead of 3 boats out fishing the quota, you have 2 boats out fishing the same quota, and 1 boat ties up at the pier side, and that boat gets paid to tie up at the pier side. It gets paid the equivalent of what it would have made if it had been out fishing. So that means, in theory, then, that the 2 boats that are still out fishing have, in theory, an extra 50% fish to catch to make their trips to sea more viable. So that's the way the tie-up works. 1 boat ties up, and so instead of 3 boats going to sea, 2 go to sea. They catch the same quota that the 3 would have caught, and therefore they're catching extra fish. So it's about making them more economically viable. So again, I was asked to do that, Deputy, but it's not that others are fishing our fish, because the boats that are out fishing that aren't tied up, they're catching the full quota. So it's not that others are catching the fish, that we're leaving the fish behind. And listen, in relation to the scad mackerel, you're asking for a reallocation there between boats. So listen, that's obviously something that's always challenging and contested, because between various sectors of the fleet, everybody wants more quota. Within the fleet, everyone wants more quota. They want a reallocation of it that leaves individual boats with more quota. So there'll always be, while there'll be those in favour of that, there'll be as many against. And then listen, in relation to the EU negotiations for bluefin tuna, again, that's the negotiations for that are conducted by the European Commission with ICAT. So I don't negotiate directly with ICAT. That's something that the European Commission do on behalf of all member states. But again, it's something I've raised at council meeting. But again, it's because it's a fishery we didn't traditionally have. Achieving quota is very difficult, but it's something that I continuously and trying to make progress on, Deputy Collins.
Okay, just one other thing, the energy, there's a rebate there for the ordinary household, yes, and the businesses. The fishermen have seen no way forward at this present time in the budget for a rebate. Is that being considered? Because so, their energy bills are far more than most, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, so the energy bills, and they do apply to the fishing industry, but it's to gas and electricity. So for the processing sector, for example, and I made sure that they were eligible for those schemes that are in place, so they're eligible. But in relation to the fishing boats themselves, they use marine gas oil. So the measure that I've had in place for those has been that second month tie-up scheme, which has delivered €12 million to support the sector through that. And obviously they're asking for additional support, such as what's in place in France and Spain, different to what I put in place here, but similar. But so that's something that as I said to you, I'm revising and reconsidering.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, just have a couple of quick ones. Under the coastal states, Minister, with the blue whiting and the Atlantic Scandinavian herring and the mackerel, last year you said yourself that Norway and the Faroes had set an unacceptable high unilateral quotas for the mackerel for 2021, and that you had concerns on that matter back then, and you actually even called on the Commissioner to reject completely the unilateral, unsustainable actions, and you more or less repeated it here again in your opening statement. What soundings are you getting from Norway and the Faroes on that?
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, it's been disgraceful, the behaviour by members of the coastal states structure, setting unilateral attacks which are in no way resemble the capacity of the stock to be fished. So people some of them are just going off and setting massively high stocks and saying we're going to fish that, and going off and trying to do it, and not coming to an agreement which actually is about sustainably managing the stock. So for example, mackerel, it spawns off the southwest coast of Ireland, it travels all the way north of Norway, and then it travels back. So there's lots of different member states that actually, or waters that it actually goes through, and therefore they all have to come together and agree how it's fished, if it's to be fished sustainably. They all have to agree, but they haven't been. Some have been basically putting their arm in and trying to set their own tack, and that's just that's something that's been completely unacceptable. And I've been very strong in calling it out, as is other ministers in the EU, and is also completely unsustainable. But I might just ask Cecil Beamish just to give a bit more of a flavour in terms of how that has been evolving and where that is at.
Just before you come in, has the Commissioner not taken any action in relation to that?
He has made his view strong on it too, but Cecil, maybe if you want to elaborate on that point. Thanks.
Deputy, as the Minister said, the mackerel is wide-ranging. It's coming from the north coast of Spain up to Norway, the UK waters, Faroese waters, Icelandic waters, international waters, and a little bit over to Greenland. So it's a huge area it covers. We catch 24% of our mackerel in our own 200-mile zone. We catch the rest of it in the UK waters, right? So we fish internationally. And as the Minister says, it does a big migration from spawning in the southwest of Ireland up over all of those areas in a feeding migration, hibernating in Norway at the bottom of the fjords in the middle of winter, and then migrating back down again. It's fished all along the migration route. So to manage this, countries in whose waters this happens have to have a duty to cooperate under the UN law of the sea, but it's only a duty to seek to cooperate. We had an agreement of governing mackerel between all the most of the parties from 2014 to 2020. Iceland wasn't a party to that, but there was an amount set aside for Iceland, Greenland and Russia. That agreement came to an end in 2020 and coincided with the UK leaving the EU as well, and no agreement has been in place, has been capable of being put in place for the last couple of years. Norway then went and set a unilateral tack. They increased their tack by 55%. Faroes followed suit. The EU and UK stayed with their share of the advised global tack. And the result of all that is that the amount of fishing has substantially exceeded what's the scientifically advised amount of catch each year. So the concern is that the stock will react to that and we'll see a downturn in the stock. This year we have our tack is advised -2%, but if the fishing remains at the high level that it's at the moment, we're going to see much more significant reductions. There is no, these are all sovereign countries, so they have to agree as sovereign parties to a deal. There isn't a mechanism to force a deal. So the negotiations have started on to try to get a new sharing arrangement in place. The first substantial round happened last weekend there was an initial round in Iceland, and last week in London was the next round. The EU is represented by the Commission, and the Commission is supported by all the Member States and works with the Member States involved. And clearly Ireland is a big stakeholder, is the largest stakeholder in terms of the EU. So what's happening is you have Norway and Faroes who have increased their share unilaterally, and you have the UK now as an independent state as well. So you're trying to hammer out an agreement between all those parties and protect your share, or even improve your share within that, right? Clearly, a failure to reach agreement is not a good omen in terms of the future direction of the stock. On the other hand, the parties have to be willing to compromise to reach an agreement. So It's a process. There's another round set for a couple of weeks' time to see can an agreement be reached this year going into next year.
And is there any indication that we're anywhere near coming to an agreement with them?
All the parties keep their own counsel. They go as far as they go in around the negotiation, and then they take it away and they see. So you don't know, you can't foresee. It is a negotiation. So there's big stakes involved here in terms of the fishery. The fishery is probably worth about €1.5 billion collectively to all the parties on the basis of the current catch. So it's a big resource, and then it's worth more downstream in terms of processing, you know. But it's always the issue with fisheries that straddle. The parties have to agree to a sharing arrangement and then what the outtake should be. So in recent years, we've agreed what the scientifically advised catch should be, but we have no way of limiting the parties to taking what was their traditional share. So it's a work in progress, and it's very complicated, but it's in everybody's interest to try to find an agreement.
Right. You also said, Minister, that there's an improvement in the status of some fish stocks, but that others remain a concern. There's multiple reasons, I suppose, why stocks have an unknown status, including the short time series of the biological data, the conflicting input data, and low catches or insignificant sampling data. Why is this? And what measures are being taken to address this? And is there any figures on the impact and any of the restrictions are actually having on the sector here in Ireland?
Thanks, Deputy Brown. So, as you outlined there, there's been a very important process and progress underway in relation to actually getting to a stage where we are fishing all stocks at maximum sustainable yield, and where we don't see them depleted and overfished, and a situation whereby they can't be fished or they're disappearing. Central to that is the science in relation to the assessment of them. But what I'll do is I'll ask Kieran Kelly, as our scientific expert in the Marine Institute, who knows a hell of a lot more than I do about this, just to give you a reflection on who leads out in this at national level in relation to pulling together the Marine Institute's assessments. Thanks, Kieran.
Okay. Thanks, Deputy. In relation to the resource assessments that are done, that feeds into the figures that you see in the sustainability assessment. Those fish stocks, as the Minister said previously, they're fished by multiple different countries, and they're also assessed by multiple different countries. So the information that leads into the assessment of a stock contains not only the Irish data from the Irish catches, but also the French and the Spanish, and the UK for that matter. And in the case of those international stocks, it also contains the catch data and the survey data from other international parties such as Russia and Norway and Iceland as well. So it's a large international collaborative effort that's used to do that assessment. Now, one of the things which has impacted not all assessments but some of the assessments in the past 2 years is COVID and the ability to be able to get sampling data from vessels. One of the factors that was there, and Ireland coped very well from this because we put in a mechanism to actually get the fishing industry to collaborate with us to do what's called self-sampling. So they were bringing samples of the catches ashore that we could biologically assess them to do the assessments on. But some other countries didn't have that scheme in place, and therefore the data got poorer during COVID. And it was during the COVID period when the data got poorer that's actually impacted the assessments that you're seeing now coming through. So that's one of the reasons why some of the assessments have got poorer more recently. But that itself should be rectified as we go forward in time. There is an international sampling agreement in place within the European Union called the Data Collection Framework, and all European countries participate in that, and everybody puts their shoulder to the wheel in terms of collecting the data and putting it through into the assessment. So that short-term situation should be ameliorated in terms of COVID. In the longer term, there are always stocks for which there is just simply insufficient information. These are stocks which are caught as a bycatch, and the information on those is not good enough to do the assessments from which we give figures for MSY, for example. And those stocks are assessed and advice is given in relation to what's called a precautionary approach. So sometimes the status of those stocks would be unknown in relation to MSY, but in relation to the precautionary approach, a precautionary advice would be given to manage those stocks. Thank you, Deputy.
Yeah, I thought there was a vote there, but she's after disappearing off the screen, so it looked to be okay.
Down will keep talking for another while there. There, just finally, Minister, last year you said that if tax was set in accordance with the single stock advice, that it would impact on 248 jobs, full-time and part-time. Now we're hearing about 400 jobs, yet we're also hearing of an increase in sustainability. Fish stocks are 51%, and look, we all appreciate the importance of sustainability. It's frightening for this planet and for the industry going forward. But the question that I want to ask is, where is the payoff for the fisheries sector? And our projected job losses compared across all the countries, and to a certain who's faring well and who's actually losing out.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Brown. So, obviously, the economic assessment and social impact assessment we've put together at the moment is based on the scientific advice, because we don't actually have the catches, the total allowable catch agreements at commission level yet, or the negotiations with the UK hasn't commenced yet. So obviously, in terms of, as Minister, my objective will be, in terms of how this process evolves, to try and ensure we get the best possible outcome, and that we have a situation whereby the economic sustainability of our fishing sector is also considered for next year. But in terms of informing us around that, we do this sustainability impact assessment and have it fully discussed in advance and tease out the implications of it. So the Port Isgiawara are central to putting that together. So what I'll do is ask just Dominic Rehan to give a comment in relation to that point as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Deputy. Yeah, well, as Kieran said, on the economic side, we do a similar thing as done for the biology of the stocks. We do an annual economic survey of the seafood sector. One of the indicators we look at is employment. So, I mean, to answer your question directly, what we've seen over the last couple of years, and remembering that our survey looks back a year, it's retrospective rather than forward-looking, the employment situation has been remarkably stable over the last few years. We're at a level of 16,000 odd jobs, and we've been at that level for the last couple of years, and that's what we're seeing. In terms of where other member states are, they do a similar economic survey of their own. Again, it's a mixed picture. If you look at some of the Baltic states, where you've had a very serious situation with cod stocks there, you've seen a decline in the fishing industry there. Other countries where you've seen in the North Sea, where the stocks have been, again, relatively stable, countries like the Netherlands and Belgium, prior to this year and the fuel crisis that is there now, again, a fairly stable position. If you look at Spain and France, again, it has seen a decline in the last 3 to 4 years. That has stabilised in the last couple of years as well, similar to our own position, but it's a kind of a mixed bag. But it's not just Ireland who's feeling the pain here, and it's not just Ireland that is potentially impacted by the changes that are there. So, as I say, it's a mixed bag, but it is respective analysis we do. So, what will happen, where that projections will show next year with the crisis we're facing now, it may be a completely different picture. Thank you.
Thanks, Camilla. Minister, this is a couple of paragraphs from a statement issued by E. O'Donnell, who, as you know, is the Chief Executive of the IFPO, a few months ago. Belgium has a 67,000-kilometre coastline, while the Irish coastline is 4,400 kilometres, representing 12% of the EU waters. Yet Belgium's fish processing sector had a turnover of 961 million in 2019, compared to just 622 million for Ireland. Germany has a coastline of 2,389 kilometres, substantially less than Ireland. Yet in 2019, their fish processing sector turnover was almost 2.2 billion, which is multiples of Ireland's. Furthermore, over the last 8 years, the Irish industry has fallen from 3rd highest in Europe to 10th place. The decommissioning scheme will reduce the whitefish fleet to 1/3 of its 2006 size. That's the scale of the scandal of allocation of resources in some of the richest fishing grounds in Europe to our own fleet. But when you look at the comparison in terms of coastline and scale of the resource versus the return, and then the impact it has, it's devastating. Can you imagine the amount of jobs that have been lost to coastal communities because of this repeated failure to get justice? And in your presentation today, even the Hague preferences aren't certain. But I'll get into questions now. You say in your opening statement, just in the second paragraph, in addition to the continuing fuel crisis. So at the outset, you acknowledge the impact of the fuel crisis on our fleet. Yet we are an outlier in Europe in terms of introducing an emergency fuel subsidy. And I'll obviously be questioning you in the Dáil, and we'll have a more substantial interaction now in a little while in the Dáil chamber. But I am absolutely shocked, Minister, that I understood a number of days ago that there was an expectation in the industry something would be announced. You know, the scale of this. I was speaking to inshore fishermen again in recent days from different parts around the coast. You know, this is a real crisis. The tie-up scheme is entirely separate. That is a Brexit adjustment reserve fund matter. And that's to compensate for the loss of quota. So that's an unrelated matter. We're talking here about the impact of the fuel crisis and the failure of our government, an outlier in Europe, with resources available, actually been encouraged, actively encouraged by the European Commission to do something, and nothing been done. And I trust, Minister, now that you've highlighted in your opening statement in the second paragraph that there will be action on that. Maybe we'll get to that in a second. I'll ask maybe 3 questions and then have a final 3 questions, if you don't mind, Chairperson. The second question then is in relation to the Common Fisheries Policy. Minister, you had proposed to extend our exclusive zone to 20 miles. Can you just give us an update as to why that hasn't been accepted and where that all stands? That would be of particular importance to a number of sectors. In terms of the third question is, and I have a few more to wrap up when you respond, Minister, the EU-UK consultations. So in terms of the EU-UK consultations, you talk about the sequencing and involving the industry, and I welcome that, and you want to get to the point where by the time you have the EU-UK, you've got a sort of a approach to that in terms of maximising the input of the industry, getting the feedback, obviously based on the scientific data. But the one thing missing that stands out like a sore thumb is rock all. Rock all. I mean, this is absolutely outrageous what has happened here. As the Irish government state, this is an uninhabited rock. You cannot put an exclusive limit around an uninhabited rock. And I want to get some kind of assurance from you today that in those negotiations that you will assert the rights, the traditional fishing rights of our industry. As you know, Greencastle, Killybegs down to Castletown Bear, this has cost over €7 million per year. It's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. Now, you know my criticism that in the middle of this process of negotiations with the British government, that the Irish government made something that was unconstitutional constitutional by ratifying the 2013 agreement by way of incorporating it in the Maritime Jurisdiction Bill. That was a huge mistake, because that bill, and you know the precedent from the Barlow judgment in the Supreme Court over the Voice Nudge Agreement, while you may have made an agreement at government-to-government level, unless it is passed by the Houses of the Oireachtas, it does not have constitutional footing. So we allowed a situation where we confirmed in our law, in line with our constitution, by passing that in the Oireachtas, we conceded that territory. But even though we did that, which was a huge mistake, we still should have access under the justice of reciprocity into those grounds. So there can be no justification for Britain putting a exclusive zone around an uninhabited island. It has no basis under international law. It would be repudiated by UNCLOS, for example. So I want to know what is happening with Rockall. Will this be a robust part of these negotiations when you engage with the British government? I know it's EU to British government level, but will you insist that the EU assert the rights of our fishermen in that regard? So that's just my first three questions, if the Minister could respond.
So thanks, Deputy McLaughlin. So yeah, so first of all, listen, I mean, in relation to the size of our fishing industry or processing industry, so as he outlined to Deputy Collins earlier on, obviously the percentages of each stocks were set in terms of the Common Fisheries Policy and the allocation key back in the early 80s, and that has remained constant since then. With the impact until the impact of Brexit. So, if you look at what we catch in our waters, in value terms, we catch €128 million of the fish caught in our waters. Non-Irish boats catch 254 million of the value in our waters, and then we catch €122 million worth of fish in non-Irish waters. Outside Irish waters altogether. So if you look at what we catch between what we catch in Irish water and what we catch outside Irish water, that's €250 million in value. In total is what our fleet would have caught last year. And what non-Irish boats would have caught in Irish waters last year would have been €254 million. So 254 million versus our total of 250 million value, okay? When you look at it from a tonnage volume point of view as opposed to value. So value-wise, we catch roughly in value about half of what the value of our waters are. If you look at it then in terms of volume of tonnage, it's much more disjointed. It's much more imbalanced, primarily because of the impact of blue whiting, because 70% of the total fish caught in our waters will be blue whiting. But if you look at it from a value point of view, now and again, the challenge here is that goes back to the early 80s. It goes back to what various countries were catching at that time, and that percentage of the pie being set then. If you look then at how that's evolved, so if you take Greencastle, for example, our home port, my home port and your local one, Greencastle would still catch as much fish now as it would have 30, 20 plus years ago. But it's a much smaller number of boats actually catching it. If you'd have walked up here in Greencastle 20, 30 years ago, it would have been very busy with a lot of smaller boats and a lot more people fishing in it, whereas now it's a smaller number of larger boats that are catching it, but a similar level of fish to what have been catching back whenever the actual pier side would have been a lot busier because of the number of people that would have been employed then and the size of the boats. But so listen, in terms of that and that overall catch and allocation, the value of it as such would have remained consistent, Brexit aside, and I've been consistently trying to ensure that impact on Brexit, and particularly the fact that we are the country that's been most impacted by that, should be addressed at European level. In relation to the Hague preferences not being certain, that has been the case ever since the Hague preferences were put in place. They have to be agreed at each EU December Council meeting. It's often resisted, but it's always been applied, and likewise that'll be something I'll be seeking to ensure happens again. In terms of us being an outlier then in Europe in terms of an emergency fuel subsidy, so listen, as I explained in detail earlier on, the Sea Fisheries Task Force report recommended a 1-month tie-up for every boat for this year. 1 month. The Sea Fisheries Task Force, was, as you know, I put together, was all of the fishing representatives were in that. That's what their report asked for, 1 month for 2022. After the invasion of Ukraine and the impact on fuel, the fishing representatives sought to meet with me again, and they asked for a 2nd month tie-up scheme, specifically to address the challenges that were there in relation to fuel because of that new impact. That 2nd month has delivered €12 million. Okay, €12 million into the sector. And that's similar in relation to what the investment would have been that France have put into their fuel subsidy or Spain would have put into theirs. I've never ruled out the fact that I would step in to do further. I've been monitoring the situation very closely. And that funding that's there in the EMFF is still there. It's earmarked for other purposes, but I can still step in and spend that now. But it is investment which is for the sector, which we'll be using for other things in the sector. But what Europe has allowed us to do is the facility to actually spend that now as a cash payment as such to support the fleet. So we had hoped that the fuel situation would be more short-lived, that it would dissipate. Over the last few weeks, it had come down somewhat, but it has spiked again. And we've seen that. So I am reassessing the situation, and also very much bearing in mind that the tie-up scheme which we've put in place has been in place since June, that is due to run out then in November. So I'm considering that and looking at it afresh. But we have responded to it. To be clear, that has been a clear, and it was a response which was sought of me by the fishing representatives, and which I responded to very, very promptly as well. And it often doesn't get mentioned in the discussion. You never mentioned it. You dispute that as well, but that's very much the position. And the actual funding that would have been invested through that has been similar to what France and Spain would have done, as an example. In terms of the 20-mile review, so at the moment we have, under the Common Fisheries Policy that was established in the early 80s, we would have had exclusive access to our 10-mile zone. And then other countries, depending on historical fishing activity, would have had some access in some parts to our 10 to 20-mile zone. I saw it as part of the Common Fisheries Policy Review access arrangements to gain complete access and control over 20-mile zone. So that's something that I pushed hard at European level. I would have travelled specifically to Paris to meet with the French Minister for the Marine, Annick Girardin, to press this, met bilaterally with many other member states as well. But I was the only fishing minister in Europe seeking to change that. There wasn't support from many other ministers seeking to change the access arrangements anywhere. But I was seeking to change that. So, but there wasn't, again, as with most things at European Council level, it requires a qualified majority vote to bring about change. So that wasn't achieved, and I voted against the proposal to move on without delivering that. But that's, and then that went to the EU Parliament, where it was discussed at the European Parliament, because all three, or the Council of Ministers, as well as the Commission and the European Parliament, have to agree on the approach. That has to be completed by the end of this year. That renewal of the access arrangements under the Common Fisheries Policy, because if it wasn't agreed by the end of this year, then the default position would be every member state would have access to the shoreline of every other member state. So therefore it had to be dealt with by the end of the year. But I sought, as part of that, to try and push ours out a bit further, but that wasn't successful. And again, it wasn't at the Parliament level. Again, there wasn't the support, qualified majority support there for it either. So the outcome of that is that it will be reviewed down in a few 3-4 years' time, but that it is renewed now before the end of this year. And then, listen, in relation to the rockall, as you know, rockall has been in British waters. What we dispute is the right of Britain to an exclusive 10-mile zone around rockall. The right to a zone it's something that's defined in international law, but we have never recognised their right to any 10-mile zone around it, or their right to sovereignty of the rock of rockall. But it's always been in British waters. That agreement that you referred to in 2013, it didn't change. Rockall was always in British waters even prior to that. The dispute we've had with them, and what we totally dispute, is that they have any right to an exclusive 10-mile access zone around rockall. We've never agreed to that, and we still hold that position strongly. What happened, of course, when Britain left the European Union is that rockall is now part of British waters, not part of European waters, because it was all European waters previously. The British water and our water and all other waters was all European water. Now you have European water and British water. And because rockall is and always was located in British waters, it's now within their water. And there's now a licensing arrangement under the Brexit agreement for European boats, including Irish boats, to be able to access British waters, and that has made the situation more challenging. But we continue to hold our position in relation to the fact that there shouldn't be any 10-mile zone. We're continuing to engage to try to achieve diplomatic progress in relation to that and to assert our historical fishing rights in that area, which is a really important fishing ground for boats from Greencastle and Donegal in particular, and indeed from the southwest coast would go fish there too.
I won't go on further about Rockall because it's 2.5 years, and it was almost 3 years now, and I think it's an outrageous approach the British government has taken, and I just would ask that it be dealt with as part of it has to be on the agenda of these negotiations. It's extreme bad faith. In terms of the next number of questions. So the non-coastal states, the coastal states part of your presentation, and then just the difficulty with the non-coastal states, and I particularly would refer to this issue around around Norway and the Faroes and Iceland. And it's outrageous the approach that they have taken unilaterally, in defiance of the science that we all have to operate within. But the concerns around that is, in terms of this 2% reduction in mackerel, that's so you've got the sort of law abiders. Based on the science, saying that there would need to be a 2% reduction. But that happens in the context of the behaviour of Norwegians, Faroese, Icelandic. And Iceland has built up a huge fishing industry. That wasn't there before. I just want to get a sense of how has this been allowed to continue? There is a fear that some of the corporations who have invested in these fishing opportunities and companies have too much of an influence at European Commission level. Some of them are based in the European member states. In other words, how can you, as a minister, stand over asking Irish fishermen to play by the rules and based on science, which is fair enough, and as you say in your presentation, that's what they want to do, while on the other hand, tolerate the situation that's been happening in terms of the Norwegians, Faroese, Icelandic, backed by huge investment from corporations, some of them based in the European member states, some of them who are availing of quota under the Common Fisheries Policy. Just to get more commentary on that. Then that's dealt with. So my final question then, a couple of questions, is this issue of the Hague preferences. Obviously, we asked for what was called burden sharing. As some of the fishing organisations recently have talked about levelling up rather than burden sharing. You might have heard that terminology in your engagement. This is about a fair share of the impact that comes from Brexit, and I think that just can't go away. I mean, listen, you've provided information on landings, as you know. Whatever way you present the issue about what percentage of the fish we get from our own EEZ, be it value versus tonnage, and that debate will go on. The fact is, if you look at the actual wealth of our seafood sector, which is indisputable, we're going down the league table. We are being we have a less of a value than a country like Belgium, which is a fraction of our coastline, and we have a fraction of the German wealth in seafood sector, even though we have a much bigger coastline. That can't be stood over, and we can debate back and forth. So I suppose my point is, to wrap up, Ciarán, and thanks for your forbearance, is that this is a profound injustice. We are seeing our seafood sector decline. We're seeing the loss of thousands of potential jobs in coastal communities. I just don't get a sense is that anger at this injustice at Irish government level. That's just the sense that's there. And if you've said about that you pushed for extending the 12 mile to a 20 mile, and you were the only voice in there. At some point, there has to be some challenge to the injustice of this. How is this based on environmental best standards when you have you have huge corporations investing in member states' quota to come in and be rewarded, and our own fleet being decommissioned to 1/3 of it was in 2006. So I just want to get a sense of just just the outrage of what's happening here, and how that can be in line with the more admirable principles of European Union, and certainly the stated principles that would be admirable, but the actions don't follow. I see corporations being rewarded here who are investing in multiple member states, anti-environmental practices being rewarded, and it's very hard to ask Irish fishing communities to step up when they don't see the same rules being applied either within the European member states or outside with countries that we're doing. Like, we're partners with Norway, Faroes and Iceland. These are strategic partners, and we're tolerating this type of behaviour and abuse. I just don't feel the outrage about it. No.
Yeah. So listen. It's not tolerable. It's not tolerable, and it's not being tolerated, Deputy McLaughlin, and it must change. No, I mean, outrage doesn't just by being outraged doesn't change it. We have to work hard to change it. But I mean, it speaks to how complicated and challenging it is to get agreement at international level in terms of how fisheries are managed. I mean, and if people don't come together and agree on managing fisheries sustainably, then there's only one inevitable result of that, which is the fishery disappearing over time. So it's not sustainable, nor it's not tolerable. And we need to see it change. And every effort I can make, and every effort I believe the European Union is making as well, and the Commission is going to be crucial in relation to doing that. And the negotiations are ongoing at the moment. In relation to in relation to the yes, listen. I mean, the management of our fisheries. Then, like, I mean, obviously within the European Union, there's a consistent policy in relation to rules, etc., and that's part of the December Fisheries Council meeting is about. And now, in the absence of the UK, it's what the negotiations with the UK are about. Now, a lot of it happens now at UK level, or in terms of that, because we share a lot of stocks. For those stocks we share, we come to a common position in relation to how they're going to be managed for the year ahead, and agreeing those. And what was there another point you made, Deputy McLaughlin?
I think that covers it. I mean, I was going to raise you just to make this point finally. Is the offshore wind? You've talked about Brexit, the issue of quotas, the issue of the fuel subsidy, but we just need to get right. We agree. Obviously, offshore wind is a very important role to play in our responsibilities as a state, but we need to make sure that the fishing communities are consulted with. I've seen some really strong contributions in recent days about looking at the these floating turbines that are further out, that they're not on the fishing grounds. So I just want to put that on the record, that be considered a part of your deliberations moving forward. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Carol. He doesn't need to respond. You've been more than good. Thanks.
Senator Lambert.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for your very competent responses and your presentation this afternoon. Minister, regarding the actual issue of where we're going with the Faroes, Norway, and that Iceland issue itself regarding the mackerel quota, you mentioned it was a 2% reduction in the actual stocks. Like, if you read the papers, the negotiations or lack of negotiations in that issue has not been very fruitful. If you were to have a continuation of fishing, which is 55% above where the actual science is, where do you propose the actual stocks will be in a few years' time? In other words, how bad will the actual issue go? What impact will it have on the entire industry of Ireland itself? It's worth a considerable amount of money, particularly in the southwest and in other parts of the country. So you might give me an indication of where you think that, if it continues, where we're going to end up in a few years' time.
Ask Kieran Kelly of the Marine Institute just to give his perspective on that, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Deputy, I think the situation with mackerel is that because the catches, because there is an international agreement, are above the advice from ICES, which is a sustainable level of catch, it means the fishing pressure on that stock is above what's sustainable in the long term. And the outcome to that is very clear over the long-term period. You will reduce the productivity of the stock. The stock will ultimately decrease and ultimately become at risk of having reduced productivity. And at the moment, what's happened is there's been luck. So the advice that ICES gives is based on the productivity on average over a period of time. And in actual fact, recruitment in mackerel has been relatively good for a relatively prolonged period of time. So we're living in a period of luck by taking those high catches at the moment. But if you run out of that luck, sooner or later those levels of catches will decrease the stock size. Thank you.
And what level would you be like? I'm trying to work out was the 2% is this year or last year. You're on about the same percentage, I assume, in the upcoming years. That would be the continuous kind of spectrum of decrease in the stock. Would that be fair to say?
At the moment, the ICES advice is for a decrease in catches of 2%. So they advised a similar level of catch in the previous year. And that level of catch is based on an average harvest rate applied to the state of the stock, which is including the incoming year classes of recruitment that comes in. It's a kind of a calculation exercise that's done looking backwards. So the stock is at the moment still relatively high and in a good state. But the levels of catch are being maintained by the high levels of recruitment that you've got. And if the recruitment coming into the stock were to decrease back to what the scientists would say you should expect on average, then the stock will decrease more rapidly. At the moment, there's only a small decrease in the stock.
And Minister, from your point of view, like these states are outside the European Circle in many ways. Like we're dealing with states that are sovereign nations, as you previously stated. There's very little, in many ways, bar negotiations. Like we don't have any real power in actually trying to enforce powers on Iceland, Faroes, or Norway regarding this issue. How confident would you be, Minister, that we could actually have, an agreement on this? When you take into consideration, we are kind of helpless in that regard.
Yeah, it is very challenging, Deputy Lombard, and the capacity to be able to force an outcome is limited. It does require people to engage and agree, and whenever you're involved in international negotiations, that's what's required. I suppose the thing being, as Kieran said, if people don't agree and if everybody doesn't take a responsible approach, the result is inevitable, and that's nobody wins. So, as I say, an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind, and the stock would be reduced. But I hope we can come to a successful outcome. It's important the European Union takes a very hard line and maintains its position and gets a fair outcome for that, because it's not, it's not acceptable that we would be the ones that are taking the pain to have an overall sustainable situation. Everybody has to step up, and it has to be fair, and everybody has to proportionately play their part. But all we can do is keep pushing and to try and get a good outcome.
Okay. Minister, regarding the tie-up scheme, which has been quite successful, and the feedback, in particular from my part of the world, has been very positive towards it. Your extension to its second year our second month was very much welcomed. Minister, what do you believe is the plans going forward for that scheme, which has been an important part of the industry for the last 8 or 9 months in particular? You mentioned the fuel issue and how you intervened with the second month regarding the fuel issue. The fuel issue hasn't really gone away. Do you have plans to look at that scheme itself going forward? And if you do, what would the timelines be of that announcement?
So, first of all, as I said, it was the fishers themselves that asked for those schemes, and as you say, those that have availed of it, and almost all of them have availed of it in the whitefish sector, have found it's made a positive contribution and made fishing and going to sea more economically viable, because it's made more quota available to those who are at sea, while those who are tied up for 1 month are able to avail of an income from the actual tie-up funding. So, again, the sector and representatives are asking for a further tie-up scheme for the start of next year. That request has been coming forward in very recent times. That's something I'll consider. But I suppose the rationale and logic behind the tie-up scheme has been as an interim measure pending the decommissioning scheme, because the objective and reason behind the rationale and proposal for the decommissioning scheme is to ensure that the size of our fleet that it's the boats that are fishing are viable and making a good income. And the way the decommissioning scheme works is that a number of boats who decide, or some boats who decide to not continue, if they don't continue, then the quota that they would have been fishing in the past is redistributed among the remaining boats. So the quota still gets fished, but there's less boats fishing it. And as I made the example earlier on of Greencastle, or my home village, for example, whereby the amount of fish being caught is similar now to what it would have been 20, 30 years ago, but the number of boats catching it is a lot less, and the number of fishers that work at catching it is less, because the capacity to catch is much higher. It's no different from my experience growing up on a farm, for example, or I'm sure in your own, whereby the machinery was much smaller and the man hours were much larger to do the same work. It's likewise, we've seen that, I see that comparison in the fishery sector. So obviously what I want and what the industry wants is more quota to make our boats even more viable. And that's a fight and a battle which we will continue with. But as I say, that hasn't changed since the early 80s, whenever the percentage carve-up was decided at that point based on fishing activity of different member states at that time. But while we continue to fight that battle at European level, the proposal is in place in relation to the decommissioning scheme to ensure the quota that boats that are fishing have quota that makes it economically viable to do so. So once the decommissioning scheme comes into place, the concept would be that the need for the tie-up scheme will be removed, because the boats will have more quota, then the boats that are fishing will have more quota to actually fish.
And if I could just follow your logic through, Minister, like your statement about the extra month to help with the fuel was a very, very positive statement. If they don't have the tie-up scheme and if you have the issue to fuel, you're stuck in a scenario that you do something with the tie-up scheme or you do something with the fuel, because you use the tie-up scheme as your intervention very, very competently in the marketplace. So what other intervention would you propose if you're going to eliminate the tie-up scheme?
So because I use the tie-up scheme as the means of delivering economic or finance to the sector to help address the fuel scheme, that means that the money which other member states would have used for their intervention, such as France and Spain, from the European Maritime Fisheries Fund, they've used that instead. I've used fresh funding to avoid having to use that EMFF funding. So that is still an option. And that is the option that I've been keeping under consideration over the last period of time. The tie-up scheme is due to run out at the end of November. Obviously, we'd hoped fuel would have come down in price by now. Hasn't been the case. So I'm assessing the situation now in terms of what assistance is required.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Minister, just a few things on it, a couple of questions. A lot of the questions have been dealt with beforehand and that there, but I must say your document that you gave here, your presentation, was interesting from the lack of detail and the lack of specifics in relation to it, and that's interesting. There's been a lot more detail got out here now through the discussion, which is probably more useful. But I'm just wondering, just in relation to the coastal states aspect of it, you say that we continue to oppose the setting of unacceptably high unilateral quotas for mackerel by a number of third countries, which we've been discussing here recently. You said then, you go and conclude then that if this unacceptable behaviour is continued into 2023, the EU must work together and use all available tools so that there are real and effective consequences for such behaviour. What are the all available tools and the real and effective consequences? That's really the first question.
Chairman, thank you. Well, the EU and the EU have many interrelationships. trade relationships. Norway is part of the EEA. It has access to the European markets. Norway and the EU do have relationships outside of mackerel, and therefore that wider political discussion leaves open possibilities. But the UK is also a party here. They're now outside of the EU, and they are a mackerel fishing nation as well, a large one. So what position they take, EU and UK at the moment are aligned in their position in terms of trying to reach an agreement. So it's a political issue. Maybe I shouldn't go any further on it, but if an agreement, the 2014 agreement did take a couple of years, maybe 3 years to reach an agreement. So these things are not quick and they're not easy. And I think, as Kieran has said, everybody has been lucky with the amount of recruitment into mackerel, but that can change. So that at least has afforded some time.
So in terms of the 2014 agreement, what effective consequences were put on by the EU in relation to that, or was there any?
No, that agreement was reached after a long process of negotiation. It gradually moved towards it. But at that time...
So none, basically.
At that time, the stock was moving north and moving west into the Icelandic waters. So Iceland, there was a significant portion set aside for Iceland at that time, and that helped to reach an agreement. But the stock has been retreating from Icelandic waters in recent years. They're increasingly fishing in international waters. Their position is weaker, and that's one of the areas for the EU to focus on in terms of...
So basically, it went on for 3 years without any extra effective consequences for such behaviour being used or anything like that there. So we're facing into the same thing again, basically.
I think, as one of the deputies said earlier, they're all sovereign nations, and you have to reach an agreement. There isn't an easy mechanism.
Supposedly the EU is a confederation of sovereign nations that we're supposedly part of, yes. And supposedly then the EU would have real and effective consequences that they can impose on other sovereign nations for non-compliance or non-willingness to deal with this issue. But in reality, they don't do anything. So, I mean, can you point to anything that the EU did in terms of other trade agreements with Norway, with the Faroes, with Iceland, that actually put pressure on them to actually deal in relation to this?
Well, there's a lot of detail goes on in the negotiations that wouldn't be shared.
So you can't?
Right. Well, in other areas, when we had previously a problem with Norway in relation to salmon farming and below-cost selling of salmon, the EU took anti-dumping measures, working closely with Ireland at the time against Norway, which brought an end to that practice.
But it didn't do anything in relation to the mackerel?
No, it's different issues.
Well, I mean, I think that, if we're an equal part of an European Union that is negotiating in relation to this and we're not getting anywhere, surely the strength of the European Union is in terms of trade and stuff like that there. It can be used as a leverage to ensure that they would actually comply in relation to the agreements. But it's clear that that's not happening, and it's probably not going to happen.
Trade sanctions as such?
Yeah, why not? Because, I mean, surely that's what it's about. That's what we should achieve. Now, I would contend that it's probably because we're the only country that's really affected by it that they don't do that. And I would wonder just how effectively we get a hearing in relation to fishing and the fishing issues at the European level as to raise the importance of that. Because it's a very important situation for us, and it's very important for the whole mackerel stock, as has been outlined by Mr. Kelly as well. So in terms of environmental issues, in terms of economic issues for the west coast of Ireland and stuff like that there, this has huge implications. But in the overall scheme of things, it doesn't have very big implications as far as Europe's concerned, really.
It's a very significant stock. Mackerel, France, for example, is a very significant stock for them as well. And I can assure you that at European level and at council level, Deputy, it is something that we put a lot of emphasis on. Obviously, the challenge is you have sovereign nations, and it requires them to come together and to agree. That can be difficult.
EU nations, or
no? In terms of the other coastal member states. Faroes, Iceland, Norway. So it does speak to the challenges in relation to fisheries management and how difficult it can be. But it's something we take very seriously, and it's something the Commission takes very seriously too.
Well, we'll have to agree.
But it's also obviously
disagree on that.
It's obviously also something that the other member states have, taken a position which is not responsible in relation to the responsible management of fisheries, and something that has been going on.
EU member states?
No, other coastal member states, not EU member states. Something that has been happening, as we discussed in good detail here today, is the responsible approach being taken within the European Union, moving to maximum sustainable yield, managing fisheries well, the control around that as well, which is important. That's what's going to make sure we have sustainable fisheries into the future, and that's what's happening at European Union level. We unfortunately are not seeing necessarily the same responsible approach being taken by some other members in relation to the stock, other countries outside of the European Union.
We're also not seeing the willingness of the EU to enforce that with other nations as well.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, you're suggesting that you go into full-blown trade sanctions in relation to this one issue, and obviously that's a tool which would be possible, but it would be a big decision for the European Union to actually do that.
Yes,
but it's something that we do in terms of the engagement and negotiation that's there, and need to get a responsible approach by all parties to it. And it's something that the European Commission has taken very seriously, and certainly it's something that I'm raising and other member states are raising ardently at Council as well, in terms of trying to get a successful conclusion to.
So there aren't any real effective in the consequences for the behaviour, and so there's nothing there that's going to enforce it to happen.
Well, in terms of how different countries engage with one another and come to agreements, Deputy Pringle, there's different engagements happening at different times, and if countries are not engaging in a fair way with others, then that has repercussions. But it's important that the issue continues to get the priority that it has been getting in relation to the approach the European Union has taken. But ultimately, you have a number of players there involved in it, a number of players that need to agree. The European Union on this issue is working closely with the UK and taking a similar approach in relation to the other countries involved, and hopefully we can get.
So up to now, the repercussions for it there hasn't been any, basically up to now.
It hasn't. We haven't. It's not a sustainable position. What has been in place the last 2 years, as has been outlined before. It took 2 or 3 years, on the previous occasion, to actually get to an agreement.
But up to now, there has been no effective reason for it, except they've caught extra quota, and that's been factored in and stuff like that there now. So there hasn't been any comeback issues for them.
Well, what we need is an outcome which respects the historic fishing patterns of the various participants in the fishery.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what we want to get.
What I'm trying to get at is, what is the EU going to do or willing to do to ensure that that happens?
Well, listen, I mean, any suggestions you have forthcoming with Deputy Pringle? I'll certainly listen. It's a challenge. I mean, it takes
people that they're doing trade with.
It takes a number of countries in order to come together, and you have a number of sovereign actors in these negotiations, and that makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah, but you have the EU as the main negotiator,
and you have others then as well.
You said they have real and effective consequences, but they haven't been willing to use any. So, okay, I just want to move on now just to the. You also mentioned the Common Fisheries Policy Review Group, and as part of your submission there in relation to it. And looking at the report on that, they've basically, and it's interesting, maybe it's my own fault, I should have been aware of it, but as far as I see that the actual Common Fisheries Policy isn't up for review this year, I think it's the first time there hasn't been a review of the Common Fisheries Policy. I wonder why that is, and why the European Commission hasn't done that. But in saying that, we're looking for a review of the Hague Principles as part of their recommendations here. Surely that opens up a very dangerous avenue for us if the EU opens up those negotiations on the Hague Principles in terms of this review. there has to be a quid pro quo for it in relation to it. We can't say that we don't want to do this now. We can't just turn around and say, it's in the submission, you submitted it to the Commission, it's all there now, this is what you're looking for. But what if they say, OK, we'll negotiate on that, what happens?
Well, we obviously want to improve our position, Deputy Pringle. That's our objective, and that's what I've been asserting at the various EU Council meetings. You're right, there isn't an appetite among the Commission or among many other Member States for a full review. In fact, I've been the only one really pushing hard for that, and indeed took a very hard line in relation to the access arrangements as well, which were discussed over the last number of months, as he outlined earlier. In relation to Brexit, which is the single biggest sideways impact to the relative stability since it was put in place in the early 80s. Our position was throughout the Brexit negotiations and afterwards that any impact, and we sought to avoid impact in the first place, but if there was to be any, that there should be fair burden sharing. That's something that Member States generally were agreed on as a principle. It's something that across the industry representatives as well, that fishing industry representatives here in Ireland working with their counterparts, because of course everyone worked closely together, and I worked closely with our fishing industry representatives in relation to how we tackled the Brexit challenge. But they likewise worked, and I worked with other Member States, but they likewise worked with their industry colleagues across Europe as well. There was a general perspective that there should be a fair burden sharing coming out of Brexit if there was to be a burden applied. That isn't what happened in relation to the negotiation. That hasn't happened yet, and that's something that I strongly believe should happen. And that is my view. But as you know, Deputy Pringle, it's subject to getting sufficient support to be able to bring about change. But that is absolutely my objective and mission here.
And do you think it's a coincidence that after Brexit they decide not to have a review of the common fisheries policy?
I think I'm the one of all Member States who are looking to change and bring about this perspective. So
no, the review of the common fisheries policy was there already. Anyway,
the challenge here is like everything, Deputy Pringle. In advance of something, people are agreeable to something being shared equally. But once an outcome comes and it has different impacts on different people, it's much more difficult to get that agreement in relation to how that should be impacted. And you'll find it very hard to find fishers in other Member States who are of the view that they should give up some of their fish in the same way as we would never, and we always want more fish, and our fishers will want more fish. And that's the challenge. That's why, in over 40 years, there hasn't been any change to the allocation key and the relative stability that was established back in the early 80s, because everybody defends ardently what they have. Everybody will always be looking for more, even those that we would feel have a lot more than what we have. But it's our job to be ardent in relation to trying to improve our position, trying to ensure that we get fair play, and that's my objective in relation to the Common Fisheries Policy Review. And again, I brought the fishing representatives together to advise on how we go about doing that, and to fully assess the strategy that can best achieve that. And I'll be taking that approach.
Sorry, to finish on this. So the review document that's been produced here, you're saying that's fully in agreement with all the fishermen and the fishing industry,
yes,
and yourself and that there. And do you think that represents a good ambition for the fishing industry?
Well, listen, I mean, I'm new to this. In the last 2 or 3 years, Deputy Pringle, there's fishing representatives whose livelihood this is, who've years of expertise, fishing representatives who've been here in the industry for 30, 40 years. I brought everybody together to assess what the best possible strategy and the strongest possible leverage we can bring to the table is. And that I felt that's the way to ensure that we most strongly assert our national position. And having brought all of our key influencers and thinkers together and representatives together of our fishing sector and our fishers across the country, that's the approach and strategy that we're going to adopt and which I will be following.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Chairman, I suppose I welcome the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of our fishing industry, and I suppose it's ironic to think that it was the English who taught us the value of our fishing around our coast, so way back in the 1600s. And if we went back to the 1970s, the early 1970s, if you were a fisherman with an average sized fishing boat, you were deemed to be as well off as anyone had a farm to themselves. And it's ironic to think that we've lost the most of that. And I suppose we all have the picture in our mind of the fishing fleet that came up the Liffey and the display they gave outside the convention centre or across the way from the convention centre, and the organised way they made their that will say their requests clear to us, to yourself, Minister, you were there that particular day. But it's sad to think that nothing has improved or nothing has happened much except this word decommissioning, and that we have failed. I'm not personalising it anywhere, Minister, but it's the government have failed and failed this fishing industry, as previous governments back over the years have completely and utterly failed the fishing communities in our coastal communities. And when you see every one of those boats and vessels out there, Minister, behind them was a shop somewhere, was a butcher shop, let it be the local restaurant or whatever, all depending on those vessels and their catches, and because the spin-off is so important as well as the income for the fishermen, it's vital, and this is adversely affecting our rural coastal communities on the periphery of the Atlantic Ocean. And we have so many miles and all the grand places. Look, I'll only talk about Kerry, Dingle, Portmagee, Sneem, the Oysterbed, Pier, Blackwater, McConalogue, Glonagillock in Tusist, and all the way back to the Castledownbere. A lot of our fishermen in Kerry come into the pier or the facilities in Castledownbere. All those, and you know, the decommissioning, I liken it to these eco schemes now being presented are being offered to farmers to actually get them out of farming. And this decommissioning, I actually hate that word, because I know that once someone decommissions and gets out of it, that's another many more livelihoods lost in a community. And you know, I listened to you about the tie-up policy, and you kept saying there in your presentations that that there's a fund in Europe that hasn't been touched yet. I'm asking you now, Minister, and I'm asking the government, the present government that we have today, to touch that fund and go after that fund. I mean, I don't know what you're waiting for, because if boats will go out of business, if fishing fleets will go out of business, because of the cost of fuel and because of the cost of everything, we need to use that fund now. Look, I welcome the 81% increase in blue whiting, but this is only going to assist or benefit a number of like 23 vessels in the total fleet around the country. I'm asking you to revise this policy so that others may benefit from this mackerel fishery as well, and get a fair share of this national fishery. And I suppose when we talk about mackerel, in my neck of the woods or in my neck of the sea, we'll say from Kinmare all out to Kinmare River, out to the mouth of Kinmare Bay. I'm hearing complaints that mackerel are very scarce, very, very scarce, Chairman. And I'm asking who knows anything about that or why that is the case. And I've also got complaints of massive trawlers coming in at different times and sweeping up everything. No one even knows who they are. Cleaning out every type of a fish that's there, and that's a complaint that I get along the side of the county that I represent. And who knows about that? Are they aware of that situation? Because it's very serious, and we used to be people calling after fishing back along the bay with mackerel. They bring them in and give them out to people, even though they were a good few miles away from where they fished them. But they'd give them to the people around inside the bar or along the street. They'd have so much of them. Those people hadn't to be seen or found at all this year, Chairman. Whatever has happened, and I've been asked to ask about that. I've been asked several times about that. See what is the reason for this? Look, Minister, it's late at night. I'm here. I'm very interested. I do know that we didn't do well out of the Brexit talks. It seems the French gained. I don't know, did we have, I'm not personalise it, I don't know, had we adequate personnel there to fight the case for us in those negotiations? But I'm being told by the fishermen from their hearts that they believe that we lost the battle because we didn't put up a reasonably and fair fight, and that we lost that fight. It's a shame. These fishermen and our fishing industry was always an integral part of our coastal communities, where the farmer or the farmer's son or some of them went fishing in order to keep food on the table. We're going to lose many of those instances of those type of people with the way the thing is going, and I'm only asking, can he do anything more than what he's done? And just look like long ago, my father had a Ferguson tractor bringing a load of rushes of all things into the village of Kilgarvan, and the farmer wanted him to go in between two houses, and the load of rushes fell against the gable of the house, and the man that ordered him to come with the load of stuff asked him, can you do any better? And my father said, sure, I'm doing my best. Well, he said, your best isn't good enough. So I'm saying to you now, Minister, your best so far hasn't been good enough. I'm asking you to do better and not to leave our entire fishing fleet disintegrate. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Yeah, listen, Deputy Ely Ray, anything and everything that can be done to support our sector has been done, and that's fighting and battling at European level, and indeed then working with the sector domestically to support it as well. In relation to the funding at the fund at European level, that is funding which is earmarked for other things in the fishing sector, but can be turned into immediate liquidity. But as I outlined earlier on, I have a scheme in place for the whitefish sector which ran from June until the end of November, and I'm assessing the challenges there and the pressure that's there in relation to that. But if you draw that down, that means that you're drawing down funding, Deputy, which is earmarked for other purposes and can go to other purposes in the fishing sector for immediate support now. So it means it's not there for something else. So that's obviously a decision you have to give strong consideration to before you do it. But listen, otherwise, overall, the fishers and the sector is really important for coastal communities, really important for the coastal community which I live, and it's one we must ensure continues to be that, and that's certainly my objective. And any proposals or policies you might have and suggestions you have in relation to how we continue to support them, Deputy Healy-Rae, I'm all ears, and my approach has been to work with those who know the industry best, who understand it, to develop shared and common strategies as to how we put our strongest effort forward to try and better the industry and to support it, and we'll continue to do that.
Just a question I had about the mackerel. Is there any explanation for why our stocks seem to be nil this year?
Kieran,
along the
Kieran to comment on that if there's any.
One of the things about mackerel, Deputy, is that it's widely distributed. So it's distributed all the way from the coast of Portugal right the way up to the coast of Norway. And if you look back into, and the Marine Institute has looked at this, we've had great scientist, John Malloy is one of them, who looked back into the historical period, for example, back in the 1800s, and you will see the exact same patterns then, which were a mystery at that point, of mackerel appearing and subsequently disappearing, particularly in the coastal area. That's small, what we call juvenile mackerel. They're immature, and their distribution, they don't just live in a place like we live in a farm or in a house. They follow food. And if there's little enough food available for them, depending on what they're hunting, they move into different areas. So the distribution of mackerel that you see around the coast is just based on the distribution of food that the mackerel are hunting. And that's why they're there sometimes and they're not there other times. And that can happen from one year to the next. So just because mackerel, juvenile mackerel, are not present in a bay in one particular year, doesn't mean they're gone from the stock, or doesn't mean they're gone from the bay. They're just gone from that bay from that year because they're in another bay.
And just briefly, the big trawlers that are cleaning out everything.
So listen, there was a decision taken and a process put in place, 3-4 years ago by my predecessor, Minister Creed, in relation to preventing large trawlers from operating inside the 6 mile zone. That was challenged in court, and for the court initially put a stay on preventing those boats coming within 6 miles, but removed that stay there in a decision a number of months ago. We're awaiting the final judgment and final decision of the court in relation to that. The objective behind the decision, Deputy ERA, was to prevent larger trawlers coming in, and particularly targeting sprat inside the 6-12 mile zone, which is an important feeder fish for other fish which feed off them. But at the moment it remains in the courts, and once I receive the final judgment, then I'll consider that.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks, and thanks, Chairman.
I would like to thank the Ministers and officials for participating in today's meeting. The next meeting of this committee will take place tomorrow evening at 5:30, where we have 3 issues to deal with: flooding in Lough Funisha, vision for the future of Irish farming, a presentation by Macra, pre-legislative scrutiny of the general scheme of the veterinary medicine products, medicated feed and fertiliser regulation bill 2022 resumed. As the committee has now concluded today's business, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.